It is my pleasure to introduce our closing general session speaker. Andrea Moore is a senior consultant at FlashPoint. I have been working with Andrea for a long time, since before she was a senior consultant at FlashPoint. I'm sure there's people in this room that have heard her speak. Last year she did an all-day session for us at this conference, but she's also just done breakout sessions and sessions just with the chamber at our office. And she is truly one of those people that is positively enthusiastic about her job, and she loves what she does, and it is infectious. And those of you that know me know that I can be a little moody from time to time, and that is not possible with Andrea. She is like the definition of a morning person all day long. And I just love working with her. She's one of my favorite speakers to work with. She's one of my favorite people in general. And I am just really actually very honored to call her my friend. So if you could, please welcome Andrea Moore.
You know what, in all of that excitement, I forgot to turn on this microphone. So let's do that. All right, well, wow, you know, what a way to close out this conference. Over the last couple of days, undoubtedly, you've taken a lot of notes, you've gotten some great ideas, and I think of the next 45 minutes as a deep breath moment, an opportunity to step back and think about, okay, now what? I've got all this great information. How can I use it to maximize my influence? There's a theme of our conversation for the next 45 minutes. You know, we spend a lot of time looking for information. We Google words to see what's out there. We ask for advice. We get perspectives from the experts. And I think that there's wisdom that we don't rely upon quite enough. And it's the wisdom that each of you hold. So as we talk today about maximizing your influence, the key message is spend more time looking in the mirror, because an absolute core belief that I hold as a facilitator, as a professional coach, is that your influence comes from you. And the greatest gift that you have to offer is not going to be found out there. It comes from you, comes from your own strengths. So today we're talking about influence. You know, when you look at this visual, clearly that bright red jumps out. The apple is really bold. It's got a brilliance about it. And it certainly stands out from the bunch. Notice where it's touching the green apples. Notice the influence that it's having in those couple of places. You know, and it's just having that influence just by being the brilliant red apple that it is. Nothing else, right? It's that simple. Dictionary.com defines influence as the capacity to affect the behavior, the development of someone or something. The capacity to affect. And you're influencing all the time. Do you realize that? You're always affecting. Drop of water hits a still pond, what happens? It ripples out. Yeah, and so just like those ripples represent your influence, each of you. You know, phone calls that you've made throughout the conference, emails that you've sent, thoughts that you've had about individuals. All of those things are ripples that have been sent out into the universe, influencing. You know, I want to point you to something you have in front of you. There's a handout. And so because this deep breath moment is about you having an opportunity to really think about your influence, what I've done in the handout is I've captured some of the key messages. So just know that they're all there. And so as you're taking notes and jotting down ideas, you can use those couple of pages. In 1999, I was in Manchester, England. I was working for a global electronics distribution company, and I had been asked to head up a global change management effort. So I was leading a team of learning and development consultants, and we had all gathered together to participate in a full week of change management, all about kind of reorganizing and readjusting the business that we were in. So very exciting week. And at that time, so I was a year out of graduate school, and I had maximized my influence by walking into the Senior Vice President of Human Resources office at about 6 months into my new job and saying, there's no centralized learning happening across this global company. I see a real need here. And he said, okay, do you want to do it? And I said, sure. I think that there are pockets of learning happening, and I think there's a real opportunity. So fast forward a few months, I was working with this team, these pockets of learning, and we were working on this change management effort. And the change management certification was being delivered by a company called Price Pritchett and Associates. And the program was called Business as Unusual. Now remember, it was to support a change management effort. How many of you are in the midst of change in your organizations right now? Yeah, so you get the skepticism, the confusion, the uncertainty, the loss of productivity that goes along with that. And right away in the certification, they shared with us this idea of, in the midst of change, you've got to keep employees focused on the certainties. You've got to keep them on what they can control. And they drew a version of this visual, and it is something that, at the time, it really struck me. So personally, because of the transition that I was in as an HR professional, it was incredibly valuable, but also from the perspective of coach and facilitator. I have used this model for over 14 years. If you've been in workshops or sessions, you would likely have heard me talking about the importance of controlling the controllables. And I said to you right out of the gate that maximizing your influence was recognizing that your influence comes from you. And I think this model points to why that is. So we all get that when you take a step back and you think about 100% of the time, in any situation, in any circumstance, what do you always have control over? Yeah, we know. It's our own attitude. It's how we react to whatever it is we're going through. It's the choices that we make. It's how we respond. It's what we choose to say. It's how we choose to say it. Yeah, and the list goes on. It's the beliefs I hold, how I perceive something. So not new, not rocket science. But why do we spend so much time then focusing time and energy and effort? Why do employees in the midst of change spend so much time and energy and effort on the things in that outside circle? That's what I want to talk about today. I want to dissect that and really drive into this. So for all of you, no doubt, you're in the midst of some sort of challenge. I asked the change question and saw several hands go up. But even personally, I would suspect that if we went around the room, each of you could name some sort of challenge. Just in the 5 minutes that Sherry and I were chatting a minute ago, she very quickly raised one. And I would suspect that all of you could do the same. So I want you now, for the purposes of our conversation today, I want you to identify a challenge, something that's outside of your control. You can write it on the handout, you can think about it in your mind's eye, but to ensure that this is really relevant for you. I have a 10-year-old daughter who I couldn't be more proud of. Her name is Mason, and she is my greatest teacher. How many of you have children and can absolutely relate to that? So Mason is shockingly a pretty gregarious, dynamic personality. And her dad and I, several months ago, decided, we need to get this kid in theater. There's a dynamism about her that we want to try to develop. So the idea is the kids would participate in an 8-week development program. And at the end of that 8 weeks, each of them would present a poem that they'd been given and rehearsed throughout the time. So Mason was given a Shel Silverstein poem called Orchestra. Anybody know the poem? Okay, a couple of you. Yeah, so there's one point within this poem where she is the orchestra. And so she's beating her belly, and she would walk stage right. She would play her flute, and she would walk stage left. And so for 8 weeks, you can imagine what was happening in my house. I saw this performance over and over and over. And we got the video camera out, and we watched it, and gave her some feedback, and she practiced and practiced and practiced. So performance day came. Props were all there. We rode in the car to the facility, practiced it on the way. So we got there, and there were 8 kids in the performance, and they all lined up along the stage, and all the parents were sitting in some little seats. Everybody had their video cameras ready, and Mason was 3rd in line. And as I watched the instructor kick off the day and the kids begin their performances, I noticed something about Mason that I had not anticipated. She was shaking. Oh, stage fright. Like, how did I miss that? You know, we practiced this thing over and over and over. How did I miss that? Wow. So of course I'm kicking myself. Maybe it'll get better. First performance goes on. Second performer comes up. By the time it's Mason's turn, she's all out shaking. You could see the knees. And as she stepped up onto the stage and turned and faced the crowd, blood had just drained from her precious little face. She was splotchy. So she gets up there, not unlike this actually. She gets up there, she's shaking, she's pale. You could have heard a pin drop. And you can imagine what's going through my head. So I put down the video camera, and I fully expected she is going to run off that stage, and she is going to dig her head into my hip, and she's going to cry. That's what's going to happen. So I'm waiting, and I'm waiting. And out of nowhere, she did it. She started the performance, and she beat her belly, and she played her flute. And it was really bad. But what do you think the audience did at the end of that performance? Standing ovation. Yeah, and why? Because of the lesson that she had just imparted. Faced with a really tough decision, a tough moment, she chose to stay on the stage. So, faced with the stuff in this outside circle, we're in the position to make choices. Viktor Frankl, the quote that's noted in your handout and here on the screen, Austrian psychiatrist who is a Holocaust survivor. So he spent 3 years in concentration camps during World War II. And I really think of him as the grandfather of this model, you know, because what he talks about in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, is the last of the human freedoms, the ability to always make a choice. And there's a significant moment in the book where he talks about being in a lab room on an experiment table and literally having been stripped literally of everything. And it dawns on him there's something that they can never take. My ability to choose in this moment what I'm focused on, what I'm thinking about, visioning myself teaching when I get out of here. So if Viktor Frankl in those circumstances can make a difficult choice, what about you in relation to the challenge that you noted a minute ago? Are you going to stay on the stage and recognize how you can influence this situation? Because I have done what I thought Mason was going to do thousands of times. It's easier to just run off the stage, not deal with it. Oh, I'll talk to her later. I'll learn that at some point. But what happens when we stay on the stage? So here's what I want to do. I've been talking for a few minutes, and I want to get you involved in this. This model likely isn't new. I mentioned not rocket science. I mentioned the first thing in '99 as a part of that change management certification, and then a few years later, going through Franklin Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People certification. There it is again. It's very similar to Stephen Covey's sphere of influence. So there's a lot of credibility in this model. I want to bring it to life for a moment. So I need you to do something for me. Let's see if we can bring it to life. I want you to have an opportunity to experience the difference between focusing on what you can control and focusing on what you cannot. So with a partner, so choose somebody right nearby. So Michelle, if you even want to just work with Beth here, and then the two of you can work together. So with a partner, over the next 30 seconds, I want you to share with your partner I want you to share your to-do list. You've been in conference for a couple of days. No doubt you have a lot of things to do when you go home tonight, tomorrow. What are the have-tos? So list out all those things you have to do. What are the must-haves? What are the shoulds that you need to get to? So 30 seconds each, go for it. You guys done? All right, let's come back together. So anybody feeling a little overwhelmed right now? So I set you up for that. I set you up by encouraging the use of language. I have to, I must, I should. What does it do when we frame something with that language? I have to, I must, I should. Yeah, it places a layer of obligation around whatever it is you say. So even if you say, I have to go to a soccer game tonight, it feels like a chore. It feels obligatory. Now, I want to say something real quickly, because I do this exercise a lot, and people say to me, but Andrea, there are obligations in life. There are things I have to do. Well, I want to say, yeah, if you choose to do them, absolutely. But I have to pay my taxes. No, you even get to choose to pay your taxes. Certainly there are consequences. You certainly don't want to pay and not paying your taxes. But yeah, I really think how we frame anything is completely up to us. So I want you to try something. I want you to use the exact same list. So don't change what it is, but I want you to change how it is you talk about it. So this time, instead of I have to, I must, I should, frame it in I'm going to, I will, or even I get to, or I choose to. So just notice the difference in how you feel from round to round, using very reactive language versus proactive language. All right, so 30 seconds each, go. What's different? Yeah. All right, great. So quick show of hands. So for how many of you, could you definitely notice a difference between rounds 1 and 2? Yeah, so lots of hands go up. And I want to just point out what changed, not the list. What changed was how you frame it. So this is not about the language we use, although it could be, because I think that's a very important thing. This is about the choice that we make and how we think about something, how we talk about something. I have a coaching client that I've worked with for a while, great relationship. And because we have the trusting relationship, I was able to say to her one time, after listening for 45 minutes about how busy she is, how overwhelmed she is, how awful everything is, that, well, yes, of course it is, because that's what you've been telling yourself for the last 45 minutes. So those are the mirror moments, being able to look in the mirror and ask ourselves the tough question, how is what I'm saying, doing, thinking, perceiving, believing about this challenge, how is it shaping it? Because the challenge, every single time, and I will go up against any challenge, the challenge is neutral. In and of itself is completely neutral. What gives it meaning? What we make of it, how we talk about it, what we believe about it. It could be a growth opportunity, or it could be the worst thing in the world. It could be an opportunity to push myself through this and do a really horrible performance, or I could run off the stage. Now, we'll get into this in a bit, but I think that we can cause ourselves challenge when we then judge the choices we make. So this is also about being willing to pick ourselves up and say, okay, that's not what I wanted to do. For a long time, maybe a year or so, I had a hole in my wall. I had a hole in my wall right where the doorknob hits the wall. Because I made a choice at 3 o'clock in the morning when my daughter woke up not wanting to sleep, I made a choice to get really frustrated and slam the door. And I was going to fix it, and of course I rationalized it. Well, it was the middle of the night, but I left it there because it was a reminder of a choice that I had made. And I wanted to remind myself, like, I don't want my daughter to think of me as the mom that slams the door when she's 30 years old and talking to her own child. I don't want her telling stories about mommy slamming doors. I want her to thinking about how I empowered her and how I smiled with her and how I laughed at her. So I left it there. Right? Didn't beat myself up, but I left it as, okay, I don't want to make those choices in the moment. So we have, as HR professionals, we have another model that we can point to as a reminder of the importance of focusing on how we're showing up. So 25 years of research, led by Dave Ulrichs, Wayne Brockbank, so the RBL group in partnership with the Ross School of Management at Michigan, University of Michigan, gives us the HR competency study. How many of you are familiar with the credible activist competency? Good. I would expect a lot more hands to go up, but this is great, even if you're just being introduced to this. Because this competency, and so it comes out of 25 years of research, that really tells us, as a profession, what are the competencies that drive greatest success as an HR professional. And with each iteration of the model, we get credible activist. And essentially, what it says is that we have most influence when there is a balance of credibility and activism. When there is a balance of knowing who I am and what I stand for and the choice I make in the moment whether or not to act on that. I have, whenever I think of this model, there's an HR professional locally I always think of. She was at a communications firm and went to an IT consultancy recently. And this IT consultancy, in the midst of a lot of growth, recognized, they were at 75 employees on their way to 150, recognized we need someone to do HR full-time. You guys can relate to that, right? We need someone to do HR full-time. And they had tried several HR professionals, and it just hadn't worked because the founding partners were very entrepreneurial. And they had this belief that HR is going to keep us bound. HR is going to put structure around things we don't want structure around. And so they brought in a few HR professionals over the course of the organization's history, and each time, very quickly, that person didn't work out because they came into the organization and tried to impart their HR knowledge. This is what you need. This is what you need. This is what you need. And they immediately felt resistance every single time. Well, this woman took a very different course of action. She told me her exact words were, for 90 days, I didn't really say anything. I sat in meetings, and she's also told me, and my boss, one of the founding partners, knew what I was doing. It was important for her to talk with him about her strategy around that. She'd never been in that industry before. She'd never been in that kind of high-growth organization, entrepreneurial organization before. So what did she need to do in her first 90 days? Learn, soak it all up, gain some credibility so that then she was in a place to act on it. Now here's the thing. So that's the having credibility and activism. What about the individual, though, that just continues to gain information and doesn't ever step up to the plate? So you get the balance. So look at these quadrants. I want you to think about one of your key stakeholders for a moment. So someone who's important for your influence in your role. Where would he or she place you based on your relationship, based on your interactions? Do they view you as someone who can have impact? Do they view you as someone with a lot of credibility but doesn't say a whole lot? Do they view you as someone who says a whole lot but doesn't necessarily have the trust in the relationships behind it? All right, are you able to place yourself? Okay, good. So another model, visual, that reminds us of taking a step back, having a deep breath moment around what are the choices. You know, this woman that I just told you, she mentioned to me one time, yeah, you know, I'm paying attention because I'm getting information, but I have to know when the time is right to act. And she said it never ends, right? I'm always doing that. In different relationships, I'm in different places. So same thing with controlling the controllables. Different challenge, I'm reacting and relating different. Different relationships, I'm reacting and relating different. But in all of those, there's the power of intentionality, that based on what's needed here in this situation, I'm acting. I'm acting. Okay, so we've talked about a couple of models, the control the controllables, the credible activist. So you might be saying, yes, great, understand, I get this. Common sense, but is it common practice? So here's a little bit of research. So I mentioned that this comes out of Covey's Be Proactive, the sphere of influence model. So Franklin Covey partnered with a company called Harris Interactive. They asked thousands of employees across lots of organizations, industries, what % of your time do you spend focused on what you can control versus what you can't? Favorite data of all time. Where do you think the majority of time is spent from the average employee? Where do you think the average time or focus is spent of employees in your organizations? How many of you say this inside circle? Anybody think the outside circle? Yeah, so 69% of the average employee's time spent focusing on things that he or she cannot control. 31% on average, time spent on things that they can control. What's the impact of that? Stress, worry, lack of productivity, wasted time and energy. And I don't think necessarily that the balance is 100% or that the right answer is 100% of our time and energy here and 0 here. This is the context in which we live. You know, I think of this as the stuff of life. And it's always evolving. The challenge that you noted for conversation today, if I were to ask you 6 months from now, different challenge, but won't there always be something? Absolutely, because that's what this life experience is all about. Is about the stuff out here that's always evolving. So your influence comes from you because this remains stable. You remain stable. So what is it that keeps us from focusing our time and attention here? I think of the stuff in this outside circle as hooks, because what they tend to do is hook us and pull us away from. And you can all relate to that feeling of being pulled off center. I have no doubt that you can relate to me at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking, oh my gosh, I have a presentation in the morning. And here I am awake dealing with a screaming child. I mean, it's in that moment that I got hooked. So her waking up crying hooked me. I slammed the door, and then by God, I'm hooked again because now I feel so guilty about what I did. So the hooking never ends. There are all kinds of things out there that can hook our attention. The important thing is, as I've noted in the handout, pay attention to what it is that hooks you. So there's a personality that challenges me, like the really strong person who knows exactly what they want, when they want it, how they want it, why they want it. I noticed as I looked at that hook, I noticed that in that moment, confronted with that personality, I would shrink every time. I would lose Andrea, and I would capitulate. Am I at the point in my life where now I'm able to stand there and be confident in that moment? Not exactly, but you know where I am? I've noticed that. And in the midst of the awareness, then we're in a position to make a choice to do something differently. So you don't have to even know what to do with the hooks. You just have to notice that they pull you off center. That's the first step. Because here's what people do, and you hear it in language all the time. Well, if only they wouldn't wake up in the middle of the night, then I wouldn't get angry. If only she wasn't so demanding or commanding or such a micromanager, then I would. Oh, but that's so disempowering. That's easy, because then it's not me, but how disempowering. You know, and as HR talent management professionals, each of you have lots of conversations about people being their best, talent being leveraged. You know, are you having these kinds of conversations where you're pushing people back to what they can control? Because we spend a lot of time talking about what we can't. But, you know, there's this regular idea that, well, if senior leadership isn't on board, then I can't do anything. That's a hook. Is it a variable that impacts what I do? Yes, absolutely. But if I choose to believe that because senior leadership isn't engaged, nothing is going to happen, then I'm right. That is going to be the case. I could also say, you know what? I am observing some disengaged behaviors here. I need to talk with these people. I need to share my passion. I need to share with them the results that could benefit from this. You know, I'm going to put Ann on the spot for just a minute, but she was in our HR peer group last year and has a lot of these hooks, a lot of these variables. But you know what Ann did? Like one relationship at a time. Who can I influence? Who can I connect with? And she's seen progress as a result of that. Does she still have some of those variables that are noted there in the handout? Yes, absolutely. And there will always be something. We can choose to focus on those factors, or we can choose to say, hey, here's a great opportunity for me to really stretch myself. I'm learning something here. All right, so you guys can tell I get really passionate about that idea. Okay. So those are the hooks. All right, so now that we get what keeps us from, oh, this is the best part, because now we need a tool. We need some tools. We need to equip ourselves with, what can I do? If the choices are up to me, how can I equip myself? Influence happens in the moment. The moment I slammed that door, I influenced that situation. Do you think that stopped her crying? No, the crying escalated as a result of the slamming door. Absolutely. And now we've got a crying kid and a guilty mom at 3 o'clock in the morning. So in those moments, what can we go to? What can we rely upon so that we can make a choice that better reflects who we are? So I've shared some research-based models. There's another one in your handouts. Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner are researchers out of the University of Santa Clara, and they have a body of work called the Leadership Challenge. How many of you are familiar with that body of work? It's from a leadership development perspective. It is incredibly credible content because it's evidence-based. And so you can measure the observable behaviors that the content is built around. And I think of this, guys, as an awesome toolkit for in the moment, what choice can I make? I can make a choice to model the behaviors that are important to me. Certainly, I don't want my daughter walking around slamming doors. I can also go to, what's my vision? What's my vision for what our relationship will look like? How can I push myself out of my comfort zone? How can I take a risk? There's a great quote that I've actually kind of used as today's theme that says, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. Yeah, that's challenge the process. Where can you push yourself to grow and take on new experiences? Who can you leverage for support? That's the enable others to act. And where might you celebrate successes? So what you have in these 5 practices is a framework based on 30 years of research. And so essentially what this model says is, if you want to have more influence, do more of these things. If you want to have more influence, start with, what are your values? What motivates you? And then you can look at, how am I aligning those values with the things I'm doing every day? You know, I think about equipping ourselves. I think of it kind of like, you know, you're watching a professional baseball player hit home run after home run. Think about all of the batting practice that led up to that home run. You know, so same thing. In a tough moment, when you're on the stage or in the middle of the night, child in front of you, yeah, think about how leveraging your values. What would empowerment do right now? What would service do right now? What would integrity do right now? Think about the value that comes from that. So what this framework gives you are some very tactical, practical choices to make in the moment. And you can simplify these 5 practices simply by saying, you know, model the way. What way are you modeling? If you're influencing all the time, do you know what influence you're having? What does your body of work represent? What do your experiences represent? You know, the things that you do every single day, all of those things are adding up to a body of work. And that's a way that's being modeled. Do you know what that is? So that's where it starts. And then, what do you want? So the challenge that you noted a moment ago, ask yourself in relation to that challenge, what would my values do in this situation? And then ask yourself the Inspire a Shared Vision question, what do I want in this scenario? What's the ideal? And then ask yourself the challenge the process question. Where might I need to push myself out of my comfort zone? Where might I need to take a risk or do something differently? And then ask yourself the enable others to act question. Who might I need to leverage? Whose strength can I call upon right now? And then ask yourself, what's already working well? What am I learning? And how can I celebrate those? All right, so I asked you to think about a challenge. What I want you to do now is with that same partner that you talked to just a moment ago, where you shared your to-do list, share with him or her, what can you do in relation to the challenge that you noted? In order to maximize your influence in this scenario, how might you call upon these 5 practices of exemplary leadership? All right, so I'll give you just a minute to chat. Go for it. I'm done. I'm just wrapping it up. All right, let's come back together. I forgot I was on. Okay, no, we're good. We're good. I gave him a minute. Good. Yeah, did you notice the energy level in the room when you came together? I mean, that's the beauty of solution-focused conversation. Yeah, when you start focused on what you can do, the energy level completely changes. I've had so many leaders over the year send me emails 2, 4, 6 months after a workshop saying, you know, this visual has been so important. I use it all the time at home with my employees. I even use it with a customer. Yeah, think about ways in which you could continue to influence others by reminding them of what they can control. I had just recently, a few days ago, I had kind of a great reminder of this idea that the challenge is always neutral. It just so happened that I ran into 2 senior leaders at a business. They both report up to the same very, very driven, entrepreneurial CEO of this company. And I ran into him. The first one, the conversation went something like this. You know, I asked about the business and continuing to grow, and we'll call this CEO, we'll call him Bob. He says, well, you know, it's actually really hard for me. To be quite honest, confidentially, he says, I'm thinking about leaving the business because Bob is just overbearing. You know, I can't keep up with him. He's so hard driving. He's constantly on me, and it's really, really tough, and I don't think I can work for him anymore. And of course, I'm asking the empowering questions. Well, what do you like about the opportunity? And don't let something like that let you leave. Yeah, you know, I love the work, but it's him. It's Bob. It's Bob. It's Bob. It's Bob. That was the message that I heard. So it was interesting then, talked to another leader in that business just very shortly after that, and his thoughts around Bob were very different. You know, he talked about Bob really driving the growth of that business and that he pushes really hard, and he said, you know, he's kind of Steve Jobs-like, and that he pushes us to be our best, and he cares so much about the business. It was the same Bob. What was different? Their attitude about it, you know, and you gotta own your perception. You've got to own it, and it's okay. I'm not judging either perception. They're just both perceptions. Yeah, I work really hard to see the beauty in every single person because that's a choice, and I know it's always there. It also is right next to challenging behaviors. Those are there too. But I choose to put my time and energy on the things of beauty. Those are the things that make me feel good. And that's me personally. So here's the closing message. So think about those 2 perceptions. In those perceptions is a choice. How they were choosing to think about their relationship with this leader. And we often forget that it is a choice. We have to remember that we can't confuse that tough choice with not having a choice. Because a lot of times we think, well, that's just Bob, that's just who he is. Yes, and at the same time, we get to choose what that relationship is. The challenge is completely neutral. You get to choose how to respond to it. Woohoo! Thank you. All right, I'll turn it back over to you.